I was there yesterday. It's so sad because over the holidays they had free admission and it was so beautiful.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Good morning. Welcome to our first adult ed forum of the new year. We've got some good programs, I think, scheduled here, but today I'm really excited to have Megan with us from the Zeidler Center for Public Discussion. We've been part of a grant program that we've worked on with them through the Greater Milwaukee Synod of the ELCA as well, and we can talk a little bit more about that later. But essentially, I wanted to help prime the pump and give you all more knowledge about the Zeidler Center and its mission and purpose, its connection to Lutheranism, and it's really New York Times recognized process for facilitated listening and discussion. And so hopefully I didn't steal anything that you were going to say.
No.
How many folks are able to be with us for our first Taboo Talk in November? Great. Thanks for being there. We invite you to join us again this Wednesday. It's during confirmation time, so it's a little bit natural that way if you have kids there. But if not, you're welcome to join us too as we do our second one, kind of thinking more constructively. How do we move forward knowing that there's discord and that we aren't going to fix that? No amount of preaching has ever converted someone who was stuck in the mud about some other position. And so how is it that we as church move forward together? And so that'll be the conversation kind of theme for the next conversation, and we'll have one more coming up here in the next few months. And so without further ado, Megan, welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. And I do recognize, some of you from that dialogue. I hope some of you will check us out this week. It's coming up very quickly. So yes, just a couple of things. We were founded in 2006 officially as a nonprofit, and kind of our Lutheran church connection. We are currently based within a Lutheran church, and we started in a Lutheran church. And while we're not officially affiliated as a Lutheran organization, every year we do reserve programming to work specifically with Lutheran congregations. This year we have the opportunity through the Synod and the Siebert Foundation to work with a number of Lutheran congregations in the area, and as far south even as Racine, to work through a lot of different issues. Kind of backing up our mission, really what we exist for is to invite trust amidst differences, and really bridging those differences with people. So whenever there's a difficult conversation, we tend to lean towards that. Anything that you feel like there'd be tension over discussing with people, those are the areas we want to go, and we want to help reduce those stereotypes. There are things, polarization in general, fear, words that come up when you think of issues that are difficult to discuss. Politics, obviously, is an area we are really trying to get involved with, helping to facilitate conversations. What's unique about our organization is we don't just have people come and start talking about difficult issues. It's a very structured, very prepared, thoughtful process that has several parts to it. So, really, it begins initially with identifying a need and identifying an area that has been challenging. So, this could be, sometimes we come in, for example, with some of these other congregations, churches that are experiencing some real big divisions for a variety of reasons, or within interfaith groups, or we've done topics like gun control, things like this, where it's hard to even express your views because there's so much emotion, let alone hear other people's views, because we just have so many preconceived notions of the other person. So we have circles, literal circles, and we've found that structure in itself, the setup, can really provide a unique opportunity. There's no, we wouldn't have a conversation that I could hide behind something and not really feel that I'm having to share, and he's listening to me. So there's nothing in the middle. We have professionally trained facilitators in each of these circles, and they go through a pretty extensive facilitation training It's numerous days. They get observed until they're allowed to actually facilitate these circles. And those facilitators do a number of things, but one really big piece is redirection, as well as keeping people to guidelines. So we've got guidelines. Some of you are probably familiar with this type of things like the talking stick. We don't have a talking stick, but we do have someone that is sort of acting as the talking stick to allow someone to speak without being interrupted. And if there is someone in the circle that is trying to kind of interrupt and interject, the facilitator's job is to gracefully redirect the conversation and provide a space where people can really be heard. They also make sure that they are keeping track of time. So in a lot of conversations, one person might just dominate the conversation and a quieter person might not have an opportunity to speak. So our facilitators actually have stopwatches and can say, can you please finish up your thought, coming to the end of your time. If there's time at the end, you can share. But it's very structured, and we found through this methodology that it's worked amazingly successfully to get people to find common ground, or at least understand one another. But who we aren't and what we do not do is we do not try to change people's mind. So we're not like, oh yes, we're getting conservatives and liberals together and we're going to shift the way people think. Not necessarily about the issues, but hopefully about each other. And my own personal start to the Zeidler Center was as a facilitator, and I was amazed just to see, on the topic of gun control, for example, people going around a circle and answering questions, personal experiences. For example, you share an experience about a time when guns have come up in your life in some form. Maybe someone shares about hunting and how to them guns and hunting is a very family-oriented experience and it means a lot to them, all these memories. And then the next person, has been wounded by a stray bullet and they share their experience. And somehow through that circle and listening to one another, you find out your strong opinions that are different coming from the same values. And so really we're just trying to have people understand and hear in a way that you don't typically get to hear one another. So I've got a really short video that explains a bit more about the methodology from our executive director. If Matt, you can play that.
The Zeidler Center for Public Discussion is a nonprofit based in Milwaukee, and we work in Milwaukee and around the world to bring facilitated dialogue to groups in tension. A lot of people focus on action, and they say we don't need to talk anymore, we need action. But with facilitated dialogue, and we use a method called reflective structured dialogue, really has embedded within it some important and powerful actions. So those actions include building trust, building relationships, deeply listening to each other, and speaking from the heart. If you're coming to a dialogue that's facilitated by the Zeidler Center for Public Discussion, what you'll come to is a large group of people. We'll have an introduction, and then we'll be splitting up into facilitated small groups of about 6 to 8 people. Each group has a facilitator within it, and everyone has the same amount of time to speak in the dialogue. With the Zeidler Center, we bring the method, and the method works across all different kinds of issues. And so we bring groups together to discuss racism, segregation, immigration, politics, all different kinds of issues. What's exciting about the process is that not only does everyone have the same amount of time to speak, but we're also privileging listening. We want people to deeply listen to each other. Some different tools that we use to help people listen to each other is we use proposed agreements for communication, where people are speaking from their personal experience and for themselves. We also have silent pauses after each person speaks to encourage deep listening. A lot of times we're very afraid of difference, and we don't usually talk to people who have radically different opinions than we do. And if we do, it's usually an argument or a debate. And so being able to come to a Zeidler dialogue and actually sit across from somebody who might have a very different worldview, or personal experience, and be able to listen deeply to what they have to say and have them listen deeply to you without the argument, without the feelings of threat. We have seen people come together in relationships and in understanding in incredibly powerful ways. The goal of the Zeidler Center dialogues, no matter what the issue, we want to humanize people. We want them to humanize each other across these boundaries, and we feel like that's so important for our society.
That's it. So one thing I didn't share about that's a key part of our process that's unique to the Zeidler Center is our facilitators actually take notes. So while people are sharing their thoughts, it's anonymous notes, and they can't really capture every single word, but they capture many words that are spoken. And we take those reports and we categorize things that have been said by people throughout the whole dialogue. And we can actually, we're attempting and beginning to measure different characteristics like trust, which is a really big deal because you can have these conversations, but people want to see, well, is it really doing anything? Changing anything. I think a lot of people would say that these are innately transformational in your inner work, just because you are hearing things that are different and maybe experiencing your own, oh my goodness, I do always want to jump in and say something. So it's good practice for everyone, but these reports are helping us to see the tangible results. One of our current sort of flagship programs are police and resident listening circles. So we're doing those within neighborhoods like Harambe and Sherman Park, and those have been getting us a lot of national attention because we're able to show that through these dialogues, trust between residents and police, and even police and residents, is actually increasing, just because you're hearing one another's thoughts and fears and things like that. I think that's really the gist of our process. I don't know if this is a time to talk more about what we're doing.
That'd be great.
Yeah. Do you want to?
I can start.
Okay.
You can piggyback up.
Sounds good.
Hi, everyone. So, you may be wondering, how did we get connected at St. Matthew's at the Zeidler Center, and what was it that really led our church leaders to say this is something good? And I think, from my own personal experience, that there's no one has ever given me a clear answer about how St. Matthew's is as a community politically. I remember I asked a lot of questions in my interview process. So what percentage would you say the congregation is divided in terms of ideology? And I heard everything from 80-20 one way to 80-20 the other. And there's all sorts of characterizations. There's all sorts of, I think that someone has described it as, well, fiscally versus socially, the numbers would flip by the moment. And one of the values I remember Pastor Chris saying in my interview process was, well, St. Matthew's is a big tent. And that's a value that we hold congregationally as to how we are church together. Yet, throughout the past couple of years, especially I think through the last election cycle, there was lots of polarization. There was lots of conversations that weren't happening at church, and there were lots of conversations that were happening at church, and maybe not in the most helpful or healthy of ways. And so when it comes to really what is the role of church in justice, how does that interact with politics, some of those wider questions. And about a year ago, our church council and social ministry committees both went through a smaller scale process of intentional dialogue. In part, that was led by Bishop Paul Erickson of the Synod. They encouraged congregations to get together and have one-on-ones among church leaders over one of 5 different topics that came up as the key issues churches in the greater Milwaukee area were facing. So it became, we have no kids. That's not an issue we have a lot here yet at St. Matthew's. Issues of, we don't know our neighborhood. Issues of how do we adjust to changing patterns in church attendance? And one of those was, how do we talk about things that might seem political at church? And as social ministry leaders got together, as church council leaders got together, we figured this is a good way to at least see where we're at. And so we went through our own kind of self-guided process, both in a social ministry meeting and in a meeting of our church council, where we had one-on-ones and were able to kind of answer the same questions to kind of get to those values points. After that happened, we weren't sure what to do next. In part because if the pastors are calling for a conversation about church and politics, you presume it's probably because we want you to think, like that. That's not the case, but how do we do that in a way that feels open and inviting to everyone? And so it came to our attention that the Synod, through the Siebert Foundation, gave us this grant opportunity, and we filled it out and were lucky recipients. I don't know how many people applied, but that's okay. And so that's really the genesis of where this came to be. Pastor Chris and I and Darla Hyam, as well as some of our other council leaders, met with the Zeidler Center people, leaders, to not get included, to help shape our conversations, and really to help us find trust around talking about what we would say are taboo things. And that what's taboo for one person may not be for the other. And one of the things that we as pastors and staff have often felt is that we come to church with a variety of understandings of what church is for us. Do you come to church to be challenged? Do you come to church to feel comforted? Do you come to church to be, to have your sins pointed out clearly or not? We don't have any universality on that either. And so part of the hope that we had was, well, let's help, give ourselves feedback about really what's happening. Because there's all these voices in the air that it's sometimes hard for us to collate. And it's hard for people to be honest with us, especially if you have a different opinion than me or Pastor Chris or Pastor Ann on a certain issue or topic. That can feel really scary. And I've been on the other side of that in my own life as a parishioner, as a younger person. Where having a different opinion than someone who has power and leadership can feel very frightening. And so the goal of these really for us was how to create safe space and space separate from us as pastors and staff for you all to get together and know each other and again build that trust. So that's a little bit of how we got to this place and why we felt it was important to engage together with the Zeidler Center in doing something like this. And so I'll pass it back over.
Sure.
That's a little bit of a nutshell.
Yeah, it's a good nutshell. And so just to give you a background too, I saw that several of you were at the first dialogue that we had. That one was about the role of faith and politics together. There's always 3 rounds, and sometimes we do 2 rounds of questions. And then we have something called connected conversation, and then an open time for sharing. So the first round tends to be a question about a personal experience, because everyone has a personal experience. You're always welcome to pass if you don't want to share, but that's the first question. How has this been a part of your life? So I don't recall the specific one for the last one, but something along the lines of where have you seen politics in church? And then everyone can share. It doesn't matter where you are in the spectrum of politics, but everyone has something to share. That second one tends to be something about values, a value you have connected. And then that third one can be about the greater spectrum of that. So it could be about the church congregation, it could be about the global church community. So that's typically the structure. And as Pastor Matt alluded to, we don't just come up with these on the spot. It's a pretty laborious, thoughtful process with several people. What do we want these questions to be, and why do we want these questions? Really, what do we want to get out of this? It's not just to make people get riled up or something like that. It's truly to have you do some serious inner thought and share something that we want to gather information on. Drop my mic there. The connected conversation could be a more specific topic we want information on for that report I mentioned to you, because at the end of all these, there are action steps. So yes, we want to get together and discuss things, but there are reasons for discussing them. For example, some things that come out of these reports are if everyone keeps saying, we wish that there were more adult education classes on XYZ, maybe immigration or something like that, then that would be an action step that the church is telling you this is something that they want. Again, the first one was faith and politics. This next one, this Wednesday evening, is going to be about moving forward in a time of discord. So the fact that there is diversity of opinion within the church, which is a very positive thing when you think about, you don't want everyone to just have one opinion, but you want that diversity. How do you live with the reality of that? So those 3 questions are based around that idea of people will disagree, but how do you disagree without being disagreeable, and moving forward united with those differences. And then that third one, the topic for that will be informed by what is shared at this next dialogue. So after each dialogue, again, there's a laborious process of you spoke, and then we listen and we cater to what you all are wanting. But it will likely be on a political topic that you can practice some of these skills that you're learning. We like to say, changing, being critical to being curious, just these basic principles of how do you interact with people that are different than you. One thing, I think it was up here, just so I can show you that cross that has words.
Oh, yeah.
From each report, we actually plug in all of the words that are said, and we can come up with these cool, they're called wordles, shapes that show which words were spoken the most by people. So it's a visual way of seeing, what was shared. We put this shape in the shape of a cross, where you can do anything. And we'll combine those at the end for everyone in your congregation to see as well. Just so you
This is ours from the first one.
Yeah, so that first one, when you're looking at faith and politics and how do they interact, the biggest word, which means it was shared the most, is people. This is interesting. Sometimes this is very insightful, sometimes it's not as much, but it's just interesting to see. Feel is a very big word that was shared. Want, one, need, believe, social, lots of feelings. So something to be aware of. Keep your eye out. You'll probably see another one of these very soon after that next report. But I don't know if, is this a good time to ask for questions?
Yeah.
Or
Yep.
Are there questions that come to mind about the process or other things that we do in the city or globally or? Yes.
I have one question for the session that's coming up this week.
Mhm.
I plan on attending.
Great.
Am I supposed to register for that? So I'm
Good
coming?
question.
How do I do that?
Yes, great question. Yes, we love when people can register in advance. It helps. There is a link. Is that?
Yes, it should be on the website, and if it's not, it'll go out in the congregational email again tomorrow.
Okay.
So,
All right, thank you.
So yes, it's an electronic form that you fill out. If you don't get a chance to fill it out, you're welcome to still attend. What it helps us do is just make sure we have enough facilitators for circles and divide people evenly when we can. For the last one, we actually had people fill out on a spectrum, your opinions and beliefs about different social issues, and tried to, as much as possible, put you with people that don't think the same way. This one, we won't have that just because of the nature of the questions. The third one, we likely will have that again, so you're aware. Something else to be aware of, it was kind of brought up, but it's not, the goal of this is not to make you feel incredibly comfortable. So we do typically split people up. If you come with friends or a spouse or a partner, if you're all right with it, we like to split people up. Challenge zone is also the growth zone. It's when you grow the most, so we encourage you to challenge yourselves in that way. But yes, definitely register if you can. Good question. Any other questions? Yes.
How do you teach people not to get angry when someone else says something that is offensive to them, and to continue to still listen?
Yeah.
Because too often I see people will immediately jump to anger and they stop listening to the other, and that person may only be able to say what they want to say with using certain words that are often offensive to other people. And if you want to dialogue with them and maybe change them, you got to at least have a thick skin. And how do you teach people to have a thick skin?
Yeah, great question. I don't know that we really know how to teach people to change themselves in that way, but to participate in the circles, we do say you have to abide by the guidelines. So that structure, the guidelines contain the emotions in a sense. So for example, we don't allow generalizations or stereotypes of saying, in a political context, all Democrats think this. All the Democrats this or that, all the Republicans. The facilitator would then step in and say, okay, I'm going to have to ask you to revisit those guidelines. Can you word that in a way that makes it about your personal experience? And if they can't, they'll get it stopped again. It has been, of course, in these conversations, there are people that don't want to follow the guidelines, and we ask if they can please, remove themselves from the circle. But that's a really difficult one, especially politics. There's so much emotion. So that's one guideline that we use, but there's 6 or 7 guidelines, and that's the best way we found of containing that issue, which is absolutely present. So we can't, I don't want to say we can teach people, but hopefully they can experience it and then be transformed by that. But some people leave these and they're still, frustrated, and I don't like what was said. That's not necessarily the goal. The goal is to hear someone else's opinion and to be heard in a way that's not going to make you feel threatened. So if someone is threatening, or if every time they get a chance to speak, they're criticizing everyone else in the circle, that's not allowed at all. We don't allow that to happen, and that's the main goal of those facilitators. They have to jump in. In our training, we have several practice rounds again and again of people just kind of interrupting each other, and they have to practice jumping in a way that's sort of natural. I mean, it's difficult, but that's a great question. I hope that answered it. Do you have a follow-up?
Could you go over those guidelines?
I don't have them with me. We actually have specific ones for the Lutheran Church that the Bishop Michael Reinhardt.
Yeah, Mike Reinhardt, yeah.
He did in correlation with some scripture verses. So I wish I had brought them with me, but I don't have those at the moment. But we could get them to you. You might have them?
I'll do some Googling.
Okay, you can Google them. Is anybody who was at the dialogue remember any of those from last time?
Ooh, this is a
You guys have pop quiz. I will say the generalizing one is one that is especially difficult for people, as well as we have one that's speaking from your own experience. It's easy to say things like, well, I heard that, or, well, when I saw this and that happen over there, I thought that, what happened to you? You have to speak from your own experience. And when you speak from your own experience, it really changes the conversation. It's not, well, I think it's outrageous that we were talking about the zip code and Red Cross. I think it's outrageous that they would do that. All right, if you have to reword that. Well, I live in the zip code, and I'm frustrated by the fact that they wouldn't come to my house because of my zip code. Then it's like, whoa, that's a different response. I'm sorry I don't have them all memorized. Maybe you'll find them.
I think, if I remember, one of the guidelines that I thought was very helpful was that as you go around the circle, that's how you begin sharing. One can feel forced to have to speak. And so one of the guidelines is you can pass.
Yeah.
Which I think is very liberating.
Mm-hmm. That's a good one.
And then come back later if you want to speak. So it's not that kind of, ooh, I'm here.
You're on the spot.
You're on the spot, yeah.
Yeah.
And you've talked about this already, but it was just so incredibly helpful as a participant to know that my time was my time to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that everybody else's job during my time was to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get to finish a thought.
Right.
Rather than having to boing off somebody else's criticism of your thought.
Yeah, that is one of the guidelines that we're now sharing airtime, we call it. And so it's really liberating when you can begin a conversation, begin your thought, and then even stop and think for a second, and you still can think, and still answer before someone jumps in, yeah. Especially people that like to think a lot, it's hard to jump in, so yes, thank you. I see more hands now, yeah.
You say at the end of going through this, there are usually action plans that are formulated. I'm just curious as to what kind of success rate you have with carrying out those action plans.
That's a great question. I think it depends on what organization we're working with. You know, for example, we do some with the Milwaukee Rep, Milwaukee Public Museum, film festivals. They don't really have action plans the same way that a Lutheran congregation might have an action plan, or the police and resident listening circles. I haven't been in this position long enough to see how much those have been fulfilled. So I guess I can't speak to the success rate, but I know even just within the last 5 months of working with these congregations, I've seen some congregations take dramatic action steps based on what was said, dramatic, shifting things. So I suppose it depends. So that's a good question. You know, if the leadership, you know, your leadership is some of your pastors, they're taking it very seriously, and I've been in the meetings debriefing, and they're really looking at what we can do versus some places we give the report to. It's up to them. It's no longer in our hands if they're really going to do it. So it's a good question, though. I saw some other hands. Yes.
You know, our political process is a bit frustrating in that the papers and the news media are paid by the political parties to stir up our emotions and divide us, basically. I truly believe that, and it does, because they want their vote. They want to demonize the other person or the other party. So we're in an environment there that is a negative environment. I would hope the center would, at points, give a list of poignant questions to candidates, or develop these lists so that they just can't tell half-truths. I read the paper every day. Everybody's telling a half-truth. And you look at that, and you know, you got to focus on, you know, every party has its points. So that's great and laudable that you have a guideline there that kind of takes people out of their comfort zone of parroting a political statement that has been presented to them on television or in the newspapers.
Yeah, I'd say, you know, even personally, from facilitating these in the past and participating in them, those guidelines in particular are really what's transformational, even for yourself, having to, exactly what you said, check yourself. You think, well, I'm abiding by these guidelines, and then you share your thought, and somebody, the facilitator's like, hey, would you mind rephrasing that? I didn't. Oh my goodness, I am completely, yeah, it's enlightening for yourself as well as everybody, so thanks for pointing that out.
I'm curious, I just so appreciate your presence. Can you share an example where you've been transformed and your opinion has changed, or your conviction?
Sure, yeah.
Yourself through this process?
Yeah, I think the gun control one in particular. I was facilitating with the Milwaukee Rep, and we facilitated after a performance. I don't remember the name for now, but it was all about gun control. I don't know if anybody remembers that. Very powerful play, and then, of course, the conversation is about gun control. And I was kind of sharing it a little bit earlier, but in the circle there was a hunter, and then there was someone that had actually been shot by a stray bullet. And as they worked through their questions, they did discover that the person that guns meant a lot to them, it really was, he missed his dad. He really meant family to him. And the person that had been shot, you know, is a valued their family and was fearful for their kids, and was fearful. It was family value for both that same opinion. I myself, wow, that was unexpected for me. So this is transformational even for the facilitators as well. But that's one that always sticks out in my mind that I wasn't expecting.
Would you go out and get a gun permit?
I don't know if I want to answer that one. Yeah, or a video.
You're in trouble.
Especially since she's carrying right now.
I have kind of a related
question to that. As a facilitator, I'm sure you hear things that are sometimes upsetting for you. Do the facilitators go back and debrief, or do you have some sort of support system
Yes.
for those situations?
Yes, it's very, very difficult. And I can speak from facilitating in the past as well. We even train our facilitators not to nod along in agreement, which is a natural, supernatural to be like, yeah. I spoke to a facilitator last week that was sharing with me. He was in a circle, and there was one young person that was sort of the unique opinion, and he so deeply just wanted to be like, yes, like, come on, you can do it. You can't do that. So yeah, we have trainings for that. We debrief with all the facilitators. There's actually personalized coaching for the facilitators. We really pour into our facilitators. And if anyone in this room wants to be a facilitator, there's trainings every month, and you can jump in on that. I'd highly recommend it. You can talk to me afterwards or look on the website for that too. Maybe you cleaned it up, I don't know. But yeah, that's a great question. It's challenging.
Are you going to share from the first session here this morning?
No, you mean the report?
Yeah. There was something I read in the announcement of this event that we'd get some feedback from that first session.
And that was before we had it. And so we decided as pastors to hold off on sharing the feedback until we have all three sessions.
Oh, you didn't run that through?
It did not make it before the printing deadline. And so what we can tell you from the feedback we got was that there was not any one place of total agreement. But that there were some specific places where people really had similar perspectives. And I'll share my own personal greatest takeaway, if that's okay with y'all. My greatest takeaway was the sense that how people expect, or what they expect out of church, really shapes what they expect the church to do politically, or say politically.
Yep.
And that's a broad generalization, but that was a theme that came through across the board, was that what you expect or want out of Sunday morning really shapes how you feel about what happens on Sunday morning.
That was very trying.
And that's not a surprise, but it was still enlightening in the sense of, that's something to think on, and that's something to work on. You know, we've talked a little bit about, well, how do we get people to talk about that? You know, what do you expect out of worship? That could be a whole new set of dialogues that shape that too. So there's a little bit of, so now I've lived up to my previous promotion. And said, you know, that was a part of the piece of that, but that we've kind of made the executive decision to wait until we have all three reports so that we can actually use them and show the movement over time. And it allows us to not bias people who haven't been part of the conversation yet. So that if you come not having participated last week, that's totally great, or last month. On Wednesday, we want you to come. But that we don't want you to feel, well, the majority of people said this. You know, we don't want to, our goal was not to create any outliers or to put any obstacles in the way to future participation. So.
And I'll jump in and just say that initially, when we were planning these, I think the idea was, let's just do specific political issues and have these conversations on them. But based off of the first one and what was said and what people wanted, the decision was made, well, let's talk about how to disagree without being disagreeable and move forward unified as a church before we get to the next one, which is more specific back and forth. Because, again, the goal here is not to just get people to go back and forth about things, but to be unified as St. Matthew's.
So can we say we're cautiously optimistic that we're going to get feedback?
Oh yeah, you'll get feedback.
You will get feedback from us, yeah.
For instance, on the gay issue, and you know, I understand, but for instance, political stuff. On the gay issue, the Senate has been kind of open of letting us have our own, develop our own opinions on these things, and I would assume that would be the same way on any political discussion.
You want to speak?
Yeah, I mean that that the body of Christ does not require any political affiliation. In fact, it's probably better without any. But
Right.
but the bigger question for us as a church then becomes, how do we talk about sometimes issues that bump in to other things that are viewed as partisan? So a good example, one place where most Lutherans come together is around human trafficking. And I've always kind of made the not joke of, it's hard to find a political reason to be against trafficking other humans, regardless of what party you're in.
Right.
Now, does that mean that when the state takes up a bill on human trafficking, there's not partisanship involved in that? No. And so how do we, how do our values shape that? So that's human trafficking is an example of a non-divisive political issue in most circumstances, but that still has partisan opinions. And so part of what we're trying to say is, you can believe whatever you want to believe, but for us too, it's how do we engage around social issues, around topics? What does Scripture say about certain pieces? And how do we do that together? And seminary does not give you all the answers to that. Maybe your degrees do, but the hope is that again, there's space for listening, and that it's not my goal to convert y'all to whatever I believe, because in my own family, I don't agree with everything that other people believe, and so on and so forth. But how do we find a greater sense of depth around all sorts of issues?
I think even Jesus stayed away from Caesar's opinions back in that time.
Did you have a question?
I did, just a little bit, because I forget how many groups were at the first one. It was 7 or 8, weren't there?
I think there were 8. There were a lot of people, yeah.
And so I think what I came with my group is, I think people were expressing different opinions, but I don't know if everybody was sort of cautious because you don't want to offend anybody or start anything.
Sure.
So it was sort of that sense, and I was wondering if that was true with all of the 8 groups, or were there some that there was more of a disagreement? And
Yes.
then it's my understanding in the next session, we won't be with the same people and a part of me would have liked to have continued with that same group. And I don't know if that ever happens either.
Yeah.
Because then you get to know people and
Right.
maybe they feel more comfortable. And my thought is, now I'm going to go this week and I'm going to have 6 or 7 other people.
Yeah, those are all great points. I would say one of the most difficult parts of this is putting people in diverse groups for a number of reasons. I mean, it's helpful. That's why it's so helpful that people register in advance, especially when you're trying to do that. But people still show up last minute, and sometimes there's just not enough diversity that you're going to have people that aren't too different in your group. Again, it depends on every different event and program, things like that. But to one of your questions, yes, there were certainly groups that had a lot of diversity, and I did hear that there was at least 1 or 2 that was like, well, we all kind of think the same thing.
Well, wasn't we thought the same thing, but I think people were saying it, because I was,
Yeah. Oh,
I guess, somewhat
I see.
surprised by a couple of comments that people made, because it was something I had never given any thought to. That's something that was very generic in the last prayer, to pray for our leaders and whatever, that some people were now putting politics in that. I mean, that's one
Right.
prime example.
Mhm.
So I think they were able to do that, but it certainly was not anywhere near heated or what I would get with a family member if we were discussing the same thing.
Right, and that I think speaks to your point. If you were to stay in that same group and build trust, maybe it would be different. I can't speak to if we have done that. I imagine that we have in certain programs, but I think for these, it's not possible just because different people come and don't come. So you would be in a different group. And this next one is truly going to be more of a random dispersal. So you may or may not be in the same group as people that you weren't before. Yeah. Any other questions? And we're getting down to the wire. I don't know if...
I think the spirit works in this whole thing. After the group is met, and there's things that happen or people change. I call it repentance, transformation, that we look at things maybe where the doors open that much and we talk to a person, or, I'm just saying, I think God is in the midst of this stuff, conflict. That's all I'm saying. It doesn't end when we walk out the door.
And that's our hope too, absolutely.
I think personal relationships, and obviously
Right.
the political belief, but you start developing personal relationships with people that are a little different than you, really has power. And it gives empathy, and that is basically the church in itself. I mean, you know, I remember, I just watched this Mississippi Burning film that was, they referred to Martin Luther King Jr. as a communist. You know, this was, and you know, when you look at the early Christian church, I mean, it was a community thing, and some people put that with a communist view. You know, and when we talk about it, basically it's a humanistic viewpoint and a peace within relationships that we're going after here, so that we can further move our own spiritual and our own actions toward each other's benefit. So.
Yeah, relational is absolutely the focus
absolutely.
of this. Yeah. Anything else? Sure, yeah, I guess we can watch one more video. This one, I believe, is a Milwaukee rep film about disgrace, which was did anyone see that? Milwaukee rep? Yeah. That was the interfaith one, right? Is that correct? Or was, okay.
We had discussions after this.
Yeah, every spring we do one with the Milwaukee Rep Theater, so I'm not sure which is going to be this year.
We're going to focus in on identity and stereotypes, okay? A lot of that was in the play. But let me talk a little bit about the methodology that we're going to utilize. It's called reflective structured dialogue. This is a different process for conversation. You guys will have exactly 2 minutes to either say what's on your mind or write some notes down. We will not criticize the views of others, participants, or attempt to convince them. This is not a debate, okay? And we will share airtime. That's the most important thing, because this methodology is designed to slow the conversation down and to promote a civil and safe place to speak your mind.
Really enjoyed that. We've always liked the talkbacks that they have here, so this was just a little more intimate. And the thing I liked about it is that it was structured, so people got to take the turn and get listened to without being interrupted.
Very fun, very helpful, gave me a chance to integrate it and to relate to other people.
It was just important to kind of process my own thoughts about it and to have a directive of where to think.
I thought that was a great addition.
I thought it was remarkable that people that were complete strangers were willing to share personal experiences.
And it wasn't hard to share at all. It had a very nice structure.
It was a great experience and something that I would definitely recommend they take advantage of while the play's still showing.
If they want their minds challenged, to come to the show.
This is how I like to have a discussion.
Step away from your comfortable surroundings and get to know someone that's of a different religion, of a different race, of a different background, and you won't be able to hate them because you know them.
So I guess it says right up there, watch for that sign up link to come out. And if you have questions, I'll be here for another couple minutes to follow up. So thank you all.
Yeah, thanks. We'll see you on Wednesday. And if you can't join us, fear not, we'll have another one coming up in the next time period, as well as we try to settle on a date for that. But thanks to those who participated, and thanks to Megan for being here again today. I couldn't find those links, I'm sorry.